China just unlocked a backdoor into one of the world's most valuable untapped resources. And the US has no way to shut it. With a single rail line, China will soon move over $100 billion worth of Afghan copper straight into its Xinjiang region in just 10 hours. No ships, no choke points, no oversight from Washington. Once again, China shows its power without firing a single shot, winning an election, or lifting a single sanction. Here's the truth about how their strategy is quietly rewriting the global balance of power. Located about 40 kilometers southeast of Kabul, the Aynak site is estimated to hold over 11.3 million metric tons of copper ore. For comparison, that's more copper than what the US produced in the last 5 years combined. And it's worth more than $100 billion at current market prices. A staggering figure, especially when you realize Afghanistan's entire GDP in 2023 was just a fifth of that amount. But Aynak is more than just a mineral deposit. It's a geopolitical linchpin. And for over a decade, it was a ticking time bomb of opportunity that no one could access. When the US invaded Afghanistan in 2001, there were early hopes that Western-backed institutions could stabilize the country and tap into its enormous natural wealth. But 20 years of military presence, over $2 trillion spent, and thousands of lives lost did not translate into stability. Instead of infrastructure and commerce, the country remained a hotbed of insurgency, corruption, and foreign interference. China watched all of this unfold, but it didn't send troops. It didn't fund regime change. It didn't drop bombs. Instead, in 2008, two major Chinese state-owned enterprises, China Metallurgical Group Corporation, MCC, and Jiangxi Copper, quietly signed a deal with the Afghan government. The price tag? A proposed $4.2 billion investment to develop the Aynak site, complete with a smelting plant, power station, and rail link. But progress never came. Political instability, Taliban resurgence, and shifting alliances made any development impossible. Fast forward to today, and China is back, this time not just with money, but with leverage. The key to unlocking Aynak wasn't military conquest or foreign aid. It was diplomacy. In recent years, China has orchestrated behind-the-scenes peace negotiations between Afghanistan and Pakistan, two countries historically torn apart by mistrust, terrorism, and border skirmishes. While the US failed to bring the region together with soldiers and spending, China brought something different: shared economic interest. These peace efforts, largely invisible in Western media, resulted in something no one thought possible. Afghan and Pakistani leaders appointed ambassadors, committed to joint border cooperation, all under Beijing's quiet guidance. The result? The stage is now set for construction of the long-stalled China-Afghanistan Railway, which will run directly from Aynak to Kashgar in western China's Xinjiang province. Once operational, copper can be loaded onto trains and transported across the border in just 10 hours. A feat that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. But here's the real kicker. This isn't just about copper. It's about control of supply chains. Copper is essential to the global transition toward electrification, used in EVs, batteries, semiconductors, and power grids. The country that controls copper flows controls the industrial future. And with this mine and this railway, China just carved out a direct path to dominate that future, without involving the US at any stage. For Afghanistan, the implications are enormous. An investment of this scale will not only generate an estimated 50,000 direct jobs, but also spur broader economic activity in a country still reeling from decades of war and poverty. Infrastructure, electricity, industrial facilities, and new trade routes will transform Aynak from a ghost site into a strategic economic engine, one tied directly to China's industrial belt. And for the US, it's the clearest sign yet that the world's center of gravity is tilting, not with a bang, but with a freight train full of copper, rolling eastward through the mountains of Central Asia. The mine may hold the treasure, but the real power lies in how it moves. And China's solution to that question is quietly reshaping the very structure of global trade. A high-speed, cross-border railway linking Aynak, Afghanistan, directly to Kashgar in western China. Set to begin construction in 2026, the China-Afghanistan Railway is more than just a logistics project. It's a strategic artery, one that connects resource-rich war zones to industrial powerhouses without touching a single sea. Once operational, it will cut the travel time for minerals from weeks down to 10 hours. That means copper mined in the Afghan mountains in the morning could be smelted in Chinese factories by nightfall. For more than a century, global trade, and by extension global power, has flowed through narrow, easily monitored maritime choke points, The Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz. Control over these arteries has meant control over the global economy. And the US Navy has built its dominance on that very principle. Today, over 80% of China's imported energy, including oil from the Middle East, flows through the Strait of Malacca, a narrow channel between Malaysia and Indonesia. It's been called China's Malacca Dilemma for years, because in the event of conflict, the US could choke that lifeline and paralyze Chinese trade with a handful of warships. The China-Afghanistan railway bypasses that threat completely. Instead of risking sea routes vulnerable to blockades, piracy, or international pressure, China is investing in a continental bypass, an overland network of rail, roads, and pipelines that cuts through Central Asia. The Aynak-Kashgar line is just one link in a growing chain that connects China to Iran, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and eventually Europe. In fact, this shift to rail isn't new. Since 2011, when the first China-Europe freight train departed, Beijing has steadily built what is now the world's largest land-based logistics system. Over 77,000 freight trains have made the journey across Eurasia, carrying more than 7 million TEUs of cargo. Delivery times are cut by more than 60% compared to sea freight. And while not yet as cheap, land routes are far more reliable than air and far less vulnerable than sea. The new China-Afghanistan route plugs directly into this system, making Afghanistan not a periphery, but a through point in the next generation of global trade. For a country long seen as a graveyard of empires, that's a massive reversal. But this railway does more than just save time. It repositions entire alliances. Same with Pakistan, where the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPC, part of the Belt and Road Initiative, is building highways, ports, and energy grids designed to feed directly into China's economy. Despite hundreds of security incidents targeting CPC from 2018 to 2023, China's diplomatic pressure has kept the project moving. And now Afghanistan, a country once defined by foreign occupation and instability, is being redefined. Not by bombs, but by tracks. This is why the Aynak Railway is so dangerous to the US. Not because it's a military threat, but because it makes US influence irrelevant. Washington can't blockade a train. It can't patrol a mountain range with aircraft carriers. It can't sanction copper out of existence. And it's rapidly losing visibility into the economic lifelines that used to run through its maritime oversight. In short, the China-Afghanistan Railway doesn't just move minerals, it moves power. It shifts the weight of influence from oceans to land, from ships to trains, from west to east. And unlike a war, this kind of transformation doesn't explode overnight. It creeps forward, steel rail by steel rail, until one day the old trade map just doesn't matter anymore. For Washington, the implications of this railway go far beyond trade. They strike at the core of American geopolitical strategy, influence through control. For more than half a century, the US has relied on its unmatched naval power and dominance of financial systems to shape the rules of global commerce. But this time, it's watching from the sidelines, unable to stop what's coming. Start with the basics. The US invested over $2 trillion and deployed thousands of troops over 2 decades in Afghanistan. The stated mission? To fight terrorism, build a stable democracy, and integrate the region into a Western-aligned order. But after 20 years of bloodshed, shifting goals, and political disillusionment, the Taliban returned to power within days of US withdrawal, and nearly everything the West had built collapsed. In contrast, China never tried to change Afghanistan's politics. It didn't prop up ideologies, nor did it build military bases. Instead, it waited, and when the moment was right, it offered a trade deal, not troops. While the US spent years chasing military solutions, China focused on the one thing that war-torn countries actually need: economic lifelines. But what really reveals Washington's weakness is its response to China's success. Just one day after the Afghan-Pakistani peace agreement was announced, the very breakthrough that made the railway project viable, the White House froze $3.5 billion in Afghan central bank assets held overseas. It was meant to send a message, but in truth, it exposed how little leverage the US has left. Here's why. Compared to the $100 billion in untapped value sitting inside the Aynak copper mine, $3.5 billion is a rounding error. Freezing that money doesn't stop the mine. It doesn't derail the railway. And it certainly doesn't block China, a country with the cash, patience, and technical expertise to fund its own development without asking the West for permission. In fact, China has systematically insulated itself from Western influence over the last decade. It's built alternative financial systems like CIPS to reduce dependency on SWIFT. It holds massive foreign currency reserves. Its state-owned enterprises can deploy capital at long horizons without shareholder pressure. And perhaps most importantly, its leaders are playing the long game. Western investors think in quarters. Beijing thinks in decades. Even traditional U.S. allies in the region are hedging. Pakistan, once heavily reliant on U.S. military aid, is now more economically tied to Beijing. Iran, sanctioned into a corner by Washington, is deepening its energy and transport partnerships with China. And Central Asian nations like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, once part of the Soviet orbit, are turning to China for trade routes, tech, and development capital. Together, these countries form a continental trade bloc that the U.S. has almost no control over. And with each new rail line, port terminal, or border crossing, China cements itself as the hub of an alternative world system. One that doesn't require U.S. approval, dollars, or aircraft carriers. Beijing's strategy doesn't rely on coercion. It relies on dependence. If a country needs investment, China shows up with funding. If a nation wants to trade, China builds the highway. If a leader seeks stability, China brokers talks, and then builds a railway to ensure everyone keeps talking. This model works, and it's working in Afghanistan, a place the U.S. failed to tame with bombs and boots, and its rivals are getting better at building influence one rail tie at a time. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When copper begins rolling from Aynak to Kashgar in just 10 hours, there's nothing the U.S. can do to stop it. No military strategy, no sanctions package, no diplomatic maneuver. So what happens when $100 billion worth of copper starts moving? Not across oceans patrolled by U.S. fleets, but over mountains, deserts, and borders that answer only to China? That's the question haunting Western policymakers. Because this isn't just a new railway. It's the death knell of the old order. So when we talk about China's backdoor to $100 billion, we're really talking about something much bigger. This isn't just an economic win. It's a strategic transformation, one that no longer needs permission from the West. In a world of headlines filled with wars, elections, and scandals, this may seem like a footnote. But make no mistake, this is how superpowers rise. And for the United States, a country used to defining the map, the biggest shock of all might be this: the train has left the station, and the U.S. is not on board.